Hello, Chemistry 10, Chemistry 10H, and Chemistry 10HH students. This is Mrs. Altman, and in this video, I will be explaining how to prepare a lab notebook. Please use this video throughout the year as a reference, and feel free to fast forward just to the sections that you need. You don't need to watch the entire thing if you're already fine with certain sections of the lab notebook. For this video, you will want a composition notebook. It must be composition. It cannot be with the spirals. You will want a blue or a black pen. And some of you will also prefer to have a ruler just to have straight lines, but that's entirely up to you. It's not required to have the ruler. So for formatting, this is just for the lab notebook. This is not for notes in my class or any other thing in my class. You need to use a blue or a black pen only. The reason why we have these rules is because they're pretty similar to the sorts of rules you will see for other lab notebooks, whether at other schools or in other labs. A lab notebook is effectively a legal document. Yours will, of course, not be used in that sense of it, but I want for you to just be familiar with this in the event that you need to do this stuff in any other sort of capacity later in life. For the notebook, you will only write on the right side of the page, not on the left side. That's only for things you want for me to grade. You can, of course, doodle on the left side. You can put notes to yourself there, but anything you want me to grade is right side only. The third point, and you're actually going to see this pop up later in the video, you're not going to scribble out any work. I'll show you what I mean. So let's just say I was writing in my notebook and I wanted to say that the color was blue, but as I wrote the word blue, somebody whispered in my ear the word sand, and then I wrote down sand instead of blue. You know, it happens. So what I do is I put a single line through it. I don't scribble it. A single line through it. I put today's date. You don't have to put the zeros in there. That's just my personal preference. You put your initials. So I'm putting JTA because those are my initials. And then wherever you have room, you put your correction. But I need to see what your mistake is. That just ensures that students aren't making up results. And that's actually not, again, my rule. That's a commonly used rule in other sorts of lab settings. And then the fourth point, so labs are typically done in some sort of group setting. We'll see what that really entails with coronavirus, but only you may write in your notebook. Sometimes you'll have one person in the group write down their observations. They can't then write it into your notebook. It must be in your own handwriting. And I am very good at recognizing handwriting, as you will learn if you don't already know that. All right, so the first thing you're going to do when you get a lab notebook is you're going to number the pages. You're going to stop at the top right-hand corner. You're not going to number the backs of your pages. There's some flexibility with that if you want to do it a different way, but by and large, this is how I want for you to do it. So I've got some pictures of my notes. So these are actually not from a lab notebook. This is from my personal notes. So hence why you're actually seeing some pink in there, but typically it'll just be blue. So you see in the top right-hand corners, I just numbered my pages 1, 2, 3. You could go ahead and number all of the pages in your notebook, or what I personally do is I just number 1 through 10. And then once I get to the next section of 10, I number them. I actually use this style of note keeping for everything I do, not just for lab notebooks. Now for your table of contents, you're going to need 4 columns. That's why I said at the beginning of the video that you may want to have a ruler with you. You're going to have a column for the lab number, a column for the lab title, a column for the date of the experiment, and a column for the page number. So I'll show you a picture of what that would look like. So in this particular one, I have 2 labs already filled in. At the beginning, you won't have anything in there. And then as you start a new lab, you will start a new row in your table of contents. So this should be in the first page of your lab notebook. Those of you with large handwriting might want to have 2 pages for this, but typically you just need 1 page. Now, the first thing that you're going to do once you're ready for a new lab, so you can go either to page 2 or to page 3 of your notebook for this, and you're going to start your header. You only need to write the header once for the lab, and then the next time you start a new lab, you're going to start a new header. You're going to have a new page for each lab. So if you have a little bit of page left in a prior lab, move on to the next page. So it'll be your name, the date of the experiment, the lab number and title of experiment, and your lab partners. I don't care the order that they're in. I just care that all 4 of those components are up top. So you'll actually see in the example I give next that I did it in a slightly different order. So I just listed it out there. Again, I don't really care exactly what it looks like. I care that I can find all of that information. So Just making sure that it's neat and clean is good and great. It doesn't have to look exactly like mine though. All right, now we have our second section. These are the objectives. You can write these word for word if you want. Feel free to use abbreviations in your notebook though. And you're going to need these during the lab in order to determine if you've taken enough observations. So this is what it would look like. I just have a section, I call it objectives, and I list the objectives. So you'll have a sheet for each lab, and it will have the objectives on it. The next section, that's the preliminary information. So in that provided lab sheet, the same sheet that you got your objectives from, it'll tell you you need the density of this, you need the definition of this. For the prelim information, you generally don't need to cite the information because almost all of it you're going to get from like Wikipedia or just straight from a Google search. If you have a book at home, I'd recommend you use it for the definitions, not because I'm going to take off points if you don't, but because the definitions from your book are typically easier to understand. If you are going to look a definition up with Google, just put the word chemistry in the search bar. That way it ensures that you get the correct thing. So this would be what it looked like. So this particular lab sheet said to look up the density of iron. So I just put density of iron and I wrote the answer I get. Make sure you use metric units for these. And then it said to include the definition of density. So I looked up the definition of density. I wrote it down. And then as you can see, I made a small mistake. So I crossed it out. I put today's date and I put my initials before continuing on. The next section, which is typically not for the 10 students, so those of you in the 10 class, feel free to fast forward. So safety information, you need this because if there is, God forbid, something happens in the lab and somebody gets something on them that they shouldn't, we want to know how serious of a situation it is. So in section 4, the safety information section will typically say what chemicals you need to look up. I'll show you what this would look like. So for this particular lab, it was just iron. So I look up iron MSDS. Let it load up. There's typically multiple of these that pop up. I chose to use the first one, but you could have just as easily picked any of the others. Just make sure it's a PDF. We're going to do an activity where we look up different MSDS sheets, so this shouldn't be super unfamiliar to you. They're typically pretty long. All you really need to look at is the potential health effects. We only care about the acute ones. We typically only really care about eye, skin, and potentially inhalation. You're not going to be eating or drinking anything in the lab, so ingestion isn't really an issue. So I look through this. I see exposure to particulates in solution may cause all sorts of problems. I see it may cause skin irritation. I'm seeing that it's inhalation of fumes. I happen to know that fumes that only happens at high temperature, so I don't really care about that. So then in my lab notebook, I'm going to, in one sentence, summarize that up. So I'd say iron may cause skin irritation, exposure to particles in a solution can cause eye problems such as conjunctivitis or other problems. You don't need to list the specifics of it. And then to cite the source, I say where I got it from. So this is Fisher Scientific and the CAS number, which will be under section 2. I'll show you what it looks like in an actual lab notebook. So I actually did this slightly out of order. I did my safety info after my pre-lab. It's totally fine to do that, by the way. So I listed my chemical, I put my brief explanation of it, and then I cited my source. And then sometimes you'll have more than one chemical to do. Next is our pre-lab questions. You don't need to write down the questions, but you do need to answer them. Any math questions, you have to show your work. And if you are taking any sort of direct quotes, so you shouldn't really need to, but again, if you need to look something up, it's not a problem. But if you do take any direct quotes, cite your source. So I'll show you what this would look like. Okay, so the first question was asking for a definition. So I did a quick definition and then I answered the second half of the question, and you don't need to write paragraphs for this. The second 2 were calculations. The second one was just a subtraction problem. Make sure you include your unit with your final answer. Whether or not you include it with the work is not, it's really up to you. It's a good idea too, but you don't always have to. And then again, I showed my work for the third one. All right, now for the last part before you get to the lab, the procedure must be written into your notebook. This can be written word for word. Feel free to use abbreviations and things like that. You cannot type it in there. There is a reason for that I could elaborate on, but for the sake of this video, I'm not going to do so. You will need it to be numbered perfectly for what we're going to be doing in the lab. And then you stop there. The rest we're going to do during class. We're going to do the observations during class. And then once you're finished your observations, you're going to sign and date your lab notebook. I'll demonstrate what that would look like. So let's pretend I've done all these observations and then I'm done. You're going to put your signature. It has to be cursive of sorts. I don't care if it looks like a potato. Just make sure that I know that it looks like a signature. Then you put the date that you did the lab. And then you are done. You must do that before you turn it in. All right, I hope this was helpful to you. Thank you so much for watching and have a great night.